November 22nd, 1910, Hoboken Station, New Jersey. A private train car departs in total silence. No media coverage, no security detail, no paper trail. 7 men sit inside. Together, they control 25% of all human wealth. But tonight, they hide behind codenames like Orville and Nelson. The secrecy is a matter of life and death. If caught, they would be charged with treason, an offense punishable by hanging. They were not there to rob a bank. They were there to change the nature of wealth itself. By the time dawn broke over Jekyll Island, every American for the next century was signed over as a debtor, not to their country, but to a private circle of elites. An unaccountable, unaudible machine with the godlike power to manufacture currency from nothing. They gave it a name, the Federal Reserve. But make no mistake, it is neither federal nor does it hold reserves. It is a financial ghost haunting the global economy. This is the Jekyll Island conspiracy, the night the dollar was hijacked, and the reason you are still footing the bill. The year was 1907. Wall Street was not just crashing, it was a bloodbath. Crowds gathered in the biting cold, hammering on bank doors, desperate for their life savings. But they were met with silence and empty safes. It was absolute anarchy. Yet, amidst the carnage, J.P. Morgan sat undisturbed in his private library, a room defined by the scent of oak and the weight of immense power. He was not panicked, he was observing. Morgan called the nation's top bankers together, locked the exits, and forced them to fund a bailout. He held them hostage until they fell in line. The public saw a savior. But in reality, the trap was being sprung. The establishment understood a fundamental truth. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. America had outgrown the control of a single man. Morgan was aging. He was not a permanent dynasty. They required a more enduring machine, a system capable of converting mass panic into sovereign authority. Of course, the public would reject a tycoon's bank. They needed a title that felt legitimate, something federal. A coded message was dispatched, passed from hand to hand, leaving no trace. The destination was Jekyll Island, an exclusive retreat for those who hold the world in their hands. There they could strip away the pretense of altruism and start dividing the spoils of America's future. They did not travel there to hunt animals. They went there to hunt a country. Inside that locked room on Jekyll Island, real names were erased. Only aliases and high-stakes machinations remained. Look at the faces around that table. Nelson Aldrich, the political muscle. Rockefeller's voice in the Senate. Paul Warburg, the architectural brain, a genius from the European financial empires. Frank Vanderlyn, the voice of National City Bank. Henry Davison and Charles Norton, the power duo of the J.P. Morgan empire. Benjamin Strong, the enforcer, the man who would later run the machine, and A. Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, a high-level insider. 7 men, 1/4 of the world's wealth. 10 days of isolation to design a trap. But before they could create money, they had to settle an internal war. Aldrich wanted a British-style central bank, centralized, powerful, blatant. But Warburg stopped him. He understood the American psyche better than the Americans themselves. Nelson, Warburg said, if you call it a central bank, it will be dead on arrival. Americans hate monopolies, but they believe in a system. In that moment, the Federal Reserve System was born. It was a brilliant PR tactic. They split it into 12 branches to create the illusion of democracy, to make the public believe that power was decentralized. The truth, every single one of them takes orders from one place. Do not let the banking jargon confuse you. The actual mechanism is brutally simple. Imagine the US government wants to spend money to build roads, buy missiles, or feed the bureaucracy. But their pockets are empty. Instead of printing their own money, a sovereign right granted to them by the Constitution, they choose to borrow it. They print a piece of paper called a bond. In reality, it is just an IOU. They take this paper and knock on the Fed's door. The masters there nod. And with a few keystrokes, they create money out of thin air. No gold, no silver, only faith. The Fed hands those digits to the government, but here is the lethal trap. The Fed does not give it for free. They charge interest. And here is the question no politician wants you to ask. If every single dollar brought into existence is born with a corresponding debt, where does the money come from to pay back that interest? End quote. The answer, it does not exist. The only way to pay the interest on the old debt is to issue new debt, an infinite loop, a system designed so that the debt can never be fully repaid. Debt is the fuel for money. If the debt were wiped clean, the dollar would simply evaporate. By the way, if you feel like a hamster running on this wheel of debt, I dive much deeper into this in my newsletter, link in the bio. No fluff, just the truth. This system does not serve the people. It serves the banking dynasties standing behind the curtain. They do not need elections. They do not need public debate. Because when you control a nation's money supply, you do not care who writes its laws. The reckoning will not come from bullets. It comes from the fact that the money in your hand loses value every second. While the power of the banking empire expands forever, they could not just hand over the keys to the gold vaults in broad daylight. They had to lie. The lie. This is a government agency, your shield against the greed of Wall Street. The truth. This is a private association engineered to protect the bankers from public accountability. Nelson Aldrich knew his face was to Wall Street. If the public knew he was the architect, they would have burned the bill to the ground. So, they did something far more sophisticated. They vanished. Aldrich retreated into the shadows. A less notorious senator stepped forward as the face of the bill. Aldrich's name was scrubbed from the documents. They slapped a federal label on it, a fresh coat of public service paint to hide the machinery of a private cartel. But for the trap to spring, they needed a presidential seal. Woodrow Wilson. Do not believe the fairy tale that Wilson was an innocent victim. The reality is far colder. Bernard Baruch, Morgan's right hand, bankrolled Wilson's campaign from the start. They did not just buy the law, they bought the man who enforced it. But there were still obstacles. Giants so wealthy they could not be bribed. 1912, 1 year before the birth of the Fed, the Titanic plunges to the bottom of the freezing Atlantic. Among the dead were John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, three of the most powerful men on earth, and the loudest voices against a central bank. Coincidence? Perhaps. But after the Titanic sank, there was no one left with enough gravity to stop them. The path was clear. December 23, 1913, the night before Christmas. While most of Congress was home for the holidays, the act was jammed through a nearly empty floor, a bloodless coup. Wilson signed his name, and immediately he was cast aside. The machine has no use for a politician once it has the power to print its own lifeblood. By 1919, Wilson suffered a stroke, leaving him completely paralyzed. Before he died, he reportedly wrote these trembling words: "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world." The ink was dry. The trap had snapped shut. We are told the Fed stabilizes inflation. Look at the naked facts. Since 1913, the purchasing power of the dollar has been systematically slaughtered. 98% of its value evaporated. Where did it go? It flowed into the pockets of the men who own the system. The American dream is now nothing more than collateral for a debt that never intends to be paid. Jekyll Island is not some dusty chapter in a history book. It is our reality. And it is breathing down the neck of the global economy at this very second. Look at that $34 trillion national debt ticking away like a madman. That is not a financial accident. It is a feature of the system. But the Fed is only level 1. Above the Fed, above every central bank on Earth, exists an entity most of you have never even heard of. The Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. Basel, Switzerland, 1930. It is the central bank to the central banks. The Fed follows orders from the BIS. The Bank of England follows orders from the BIS. But the BIS, it answers to no one. International immunity from prosecution. No audits. No elections. If the Fed is the trap for America, the BIS is the cage for the entire world. We are living in an empire built on hollow promises. A world where the value of your labor is systematically eroded by a printing press hidden behind closed doors. You work harder, you earn more, yet you only grow poorer. Why? Because the system was not designed for your prosperity. It was engineered to ensure that wealth always flows back to the bloodlines who created it. We are merely temporary caretakers of money we mistakenly believe is ours. And if you still have doubts, listen to the confession of Frank Vanderlip himself in 1916. One of the 7 men in that room wrote, "I was as secretive, indeed, as furtive, as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. History has confessed, this is not a conspiracy theory, it is an admitted conspiracy. That night at Jekyll Island, they did not just steal the dollar, they stole the future. They turned you into a debtor from your very first cry in the hospital. $34 trillion in debt, divided by the population. Every newborn child enters this world carrying a debt of over $100,000 from day one. So, the final question is not when this system will collapse. The question is, when the music finally stops and the real owners come knocking to collect, what will you use as collateral for your freedom? Or is the truth that you were signed over a long, long time ago